Since childhood, we are taught to hide parts of us. Shut up when we feel angry, smiling even though they are sad, then invisible rules of behavior to be accepted. And gradually, without realizing it, we suffocate everything that does not fit. Not because these parts are bad or wrong, but because they told us that they do not match with the image they expect from us. How many times have you swallowed what you mean just to avoid judgment? How many times have you been acting authentically for fear of looking strange, exaggerated, or inappropriate? This constant censorship shapes a version of us that is safe, but superficial. And what happens to everything we repress? It goes to a deep and dark place of the mind, a psychic basement where we hide wills, fears, impulses, uncomfortable truths, and even powers that we didn't even have the courage to know. This basement has a name: shadow. The shadow is like a broken mirror. It reflects parts of who we are, but distorted. And as much as we try to ignore her, she is still there, acting between the lines of our choices, sabotaging relationships, blocking our growth. The truth is that most people are not afraid of the evil they can do, but the good that could live if you stop denying who you really are. Because staring at one's shadow requires courage. It requires leaving the comfort of the socially accepted image. It requires breaking with the persona, this cute mask that we support for the world. But why do we do that? Why do we spend a lifetime trying to look good, right, normal? The answer is brutal, because we have been conditioned to believe that being whole is dangerous, that showing everything we feel is a sign of weakness, that daring to be different is an invitation to abandonment. And so we live in half, existing in a reduced version of ourselves, ignoring the other half, the one that screams in silence, who manifests itself in the explosions, who visits us in dreams or impulses that we cannot control. This is the root of the psychological suffering of many, a life disconnected from all of the being. And the first step to change this is to ask the simplest and most difficult question of all: what am I still trying to hide? Carl Jung, one of the biggest names in psychology of the 20th century, was the first to shape and name to this hidden side of the mind we avoid so much. He called shadow all that is repressed, forgotten, or simply never accepted by consciousness. And here is the central point. Everything that consciousness rejects, the unconscious welcomes. But Jung did not see the shadow like an inner monster. It is actually a vital part of our totality. Without it, we are not integers. But, like any part denied, it begins to act on its own. As, through uncontrolled impulses, projections in others, sabotage, emotional explosions, and even psychosomatic diseases. That's why you sometimes explode with someone for a seemingly small reason, or feels a deep contempt for someone without knowing exactly why. It is not the other person, and you. It is its shadow projected in it. Jung said that what makes us more irritates us in others may be just what we are refusing to see in ourselves. He also introduced two fundamental concepts to understand the shadow: persona, the social mask, what we show the world. It is how we want to be seen: strong, fair, balanced, pleasant. Shadow, everything the persona hides: weaknesses, desires, contradictions, fears, impulses. And the more rigid your persona is, the more violent the shadow will be. The more you try to always look good, the more you risk hiding destructive impulses. Jung believed that true psychological maturity only happens when we accept to integrate this duality, when we stop pretending that we are only light and recognize the darkness we carry. But here's the key point of Jungian psychology. The shadow is not only made of bad things, it also houses positive aspects of personality that were rejected. For not fitting into the social environment you grew up. You may have repressed your creativity because they said that it does not give money. It may have hidden your boldness because they called you inconvenient. He may have buried his adventurous spirit because his family only valued stability. All this is in the shadow. That is, Not to face the shadow is to refuse brilliant parts of yourself. And it does not disappear. She only finds other ways to manifest. In addictions, in unhealthy relationships, in dreams, in irrational fears, in a meaningless life. That's why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, he will direct your life and you will call it fate. Do you really have control over your choices? Or is it your shadow deciding for you while you pretend to be in charge? This is Jung's provocation, and it is the first step towards true inner freedom. Ignoring the shadow does not eliminate it. In fact, it is the opposite. Everything you repressed comes back, and comes back stronger. Jung warned, what you resist persists. When you deny the impulses, desires, and feelings that do not match the image you created from yourself, you don't destroy them, just pushes them into the basement of the mind. But this basement, the unconscious, is not a static place. It is an active, alive space where everything that has been rejected continues to act in the mute. This constant repression charges a very high price. Let's talk about some symptoms. 1. Projection. It is the most common phenomenon. You see in the other everything you refuse to recognize in yourself. The pride that pisses you off in the coworker, the arrogance of your boss, the envy of someone close. All this can be just a reflection of what is in your own shadow. You accuse the other to not have to accuse yourself. You reject the other what you can't accept in you. 2. Sabotage. Have you ever felt that whenever you are about to take an important step, something pulls you back? That there is a part of you who don't want success, don't want change, don't want freedom. It is often the shadow boycotting its advances. She wants to keep you where you are, in the safe zone of unconsciousness. Growing requires looking at it, and the shadow fears being exposed. 3. Emotional explosions. Do you know that moment when you act like never thought you would act? Scream, assault, mind, humiliate, or make an impulsive decision from which you regret it later? This is the shadow breaking the persona control. She can no longer be stuck, so explode, and who pays is you, or who is around you. 4. Existential void. Suppress the shadow also choke positive aspects of yourself. Creativity, spontaneity, desire, life force. All of this, if repressed, leads to apathy, lack of enthusiasm, existential depression. Life loses its taste. The world is colorless, because you amputated essential parts of who you are. Jung stated that one of the greatest problems of modern human is to live divided between what it is and what it pretends to be. This inner split causes constant discomfort. The social mask, the persona, requires effort. And the more you try to sustain a perfect image, the more distant you get from your authenticity. Worse yet, the more good it is good, the more dangerous the shadow becomes. Jung said, the bigger the light, the greater the shadow. That is, those who try to always seem virtuous can hide within the most destructive impulses. The repression of the shadow is like compressing a spring. The more strength you do to keep it in place, the more violent the jump when it escapes. And she escapes, always. This is why integrating the shadow is not an option. It is a necessity, because if you don't confront her, she will control you. And then, when you least expect it, you will become exactly what you swore it would never be. From an early age, we learn that we need to please, that you need to smile when you are sad, be polite even when you are annoyed, hide what we feel to fit in some pattern. This process is inevitable and necessary, but when exaggerated, it becomes prison, becomes a character. Turn the persona. In Jungian psychology, persona is the mask we use to relate to the world. It is not, by itself, something negative. It acts as a filter, an adaptation to social demands. It is the role we play at school, at work, with the family, on social networks. It helps build bonds and protect us from full exhibition. The problem begins when we confuse this mask with who we really are. When we believe we are the persona. You have probably done that. He has played the role of the obedient son, the impeccable professional, the spiritually high person, even when in conflict inside. And the more you play, the more distant it gets from yourself. The persona shapes from the expectations of others. It is built based on what they applauded you, approved, or allowed it to be. Throughout our lives, we learn that this can and this cannot. This pleases, that goes away. And then it cuts parts of itself, a dash, a taste, a reaction, an opinion, until there is a socially acceptable version. And that is the danger. Because everything that was deleted in the construction of the persona goes straight to the shadow. A simple example. Imagine a spontaneous, talking, energetic child. If since I was a child she is repressed. Speak bass, stay quiet, behavior girl. She learns to silence. And all that spontaneity is being buried. In adulthood, she can be a stuck, insecure person who sabots himself when he tries to express himself. And you don't even understand why. It's because that living part of her was pushed into the shadow. Jung said the persona, when not balanced, makes us meat mannequins. People who work but don't feel, that represent but do not live, who are always trying to be what they expect from them. And so they run out, depress, get lost. The price of supporting the mask is high, because there is nothing more tiring than playing a role all the time. You end the day sold out not because you work too much, but because you had to hide who it really is. And this is a silent but deep wear. But beware, integrating the shadow does not mean destroying the persona. That would be chaos. Balance is to keep the mask, but not believing it is everything. It's like wearing an outfit to go out on the street. You need to dress, but it's not the clothes that define who you are. The big challenge is to stop identifying itself exclusively with the persona. It is accepting that you are much more complex, ambiguous, and deep than any image you project to the world. And from this, start the true process of individuation, the way back to its essence. Do you know that behavior you condemn strongly in others? That attitude that irritates you disproportionately? Does that person who arouses you an aversion for no clear reason? It is very likely that your shadow is speaking, not with your mouth, but with your judgment. Carl Jung called this projection the unconscious mechanism that leads us to see in others what we deny ourselves. It is as if parts of our psyche, who were repressed, needed to manifest themselves. So they find shelter in the outside world, and this is more common than it seems. When we feel irrational anger from someone arrogant, it may be that there is a part of us who would also like to impose more, to be bolder, but was repressed back there, perhaps for fear, shame, or social rules that said that being humble was the only way. When we feel exaggerated disgust from someone who exposes himself, perhaps there is a repressed desire to be freer, to show himself more, to take up space. The projection is, in practice, the shadow trying to return to consciousness, but through the wrong door. And that is dangerous, because we start attacking outside what should be investigated inside. We create imaginary enemies, get stuck in judgment patterns, and waste energy by fighting the reflection rather than looking into the mirror. But there is a powerful side in this mechanism. Projection can be used as a compass. Whenever something or someone bothers us deeply, it is worth stopping and asking, what does that say about me? What is this situation trying to show me about something not solved within me? Of course, not every discomfort is projection. There are really unacceptable attitudes that must be criticized. But the emotional intensity, the excess of judgment, and the frequency with which certain standards affect us can be clues that we are projecting our shadow. And that is not valid only for negative aspects. Sometimes we also project the best in us. When we admire someone deeply, that person who seems to have courage, authenticity, brightness, it is common to be projecting in it a potential of ours that has been buried. Jung said that the shadow not only houses the monsters, but also the forgotten talents, the legitimate desires, and the life force we muffled to be accepted. So yes, when you feel envy, anger, idolatry, or extreme judgment, pay attention. The shadow is whispering something. The question is, will you keep ignoring, or will you finally listen? For a long time, we have learned to associate the shadow only to what is bad in us. Selfish impulses, aggressive features, desires considered shameful. But Jung was categorical. The shadow is not just psychic waste. She also keeps forgotten treasures. Within the shadow are our repressed aspects. But not only those that society considers dangerous, there are also suffocated talents, repressed wills, and even virtues that were once judged as inappropriate, but which could be just what today is missing in our lives. How many people repress their creativity because they were called distracted in childhood? How many avoid showing firmness because they have always been educated to give in? How many hid their brightness because they heard that they shouldn't find out themselves? These parts, vital, intense, true, went to the same mental basement where we keep our anger or envy. And so we stop accessing our power. Intecting the shadow is to recover these parts. It is to bring to consciousness not only what scares us, but also what strengthens us. Want an example? The desire for power. Many people associate this with ego, domination. But the desire to be able, when well channeled, may be the engine of autonomy, leadership, the ability to protect those who love and gain something relevant in the world. The problem is not in feeling, is not knowing how to deal with what you feel. That's why Jung stated, "No one enlightens imagining figures of light, but making darkness conscious." That is, to grow is not to eliminate the shadow, but to illuminate it. And that is not denying, but welcoming. The process of individuation, the path towards all of the being, requires courage to confront this darkness and bring out what it keeps. Even many people live tired, anxious, or unmotivated because it continually represses internal forces that could be used as creative energy. It is no exaggeration to say that by fleeing the shadow, we are also running away from our vitality. Therefore, the challenge is to stop seeing the shadow as an enemy and start treating it as an ally, as a part of us that just wants to be heard. When we do this, something changes. Fear becomes understanding. The guilt becomes responsibility. Anger becomes a change of change. And then the shadow ceases to dominate us and comes to serve us. At the end of this journey through our shadow, one thing is clear. We are not just light, not just darkness. We are the encounter between the two. And it is in this balance that the power to be who we really live in. Integrating the shadow is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. About stopping running away from yourself. And finally, look in the eyes of what scares us. To find out that there is our strength. There too. Our courage. Our authenticity. And now I ask you, are you willing to confront your own shadow? To recognize your desires, your contradictions, your repressed talents? Or will you keep hiding behind a social mask that no longer serves you? If this video has teased you, made you think, or helped you see something of yourself that was forgotten, then like, share, and especially comment below. Tell me, what did you find out about your shadow today? Subscribe to the channel not to miss any episode of our inner odyssey. And remember, the more you know yourself, the less you sabotage yourself. We see each other in the next dive.